This is what most people do not understand when it comes to stress. Most people aren't stressed. There are other things that are triggering that in the first place. Now, this happened the other day where I was with a staff member. They said, I'm just really stressed out, and they kept using this term stress. And I noticed that it had become a pattern of behavior over the last week. If ever you're stressed, or if you're in a management or leadership and someone in your team is stressed, what we want to do is we want to start with step number one, which is you've got to ask really good questions first. When we were walking, I just started asking questions like, why do you think you're stressed? And then what they said is, it's just the workload. The workload is really stressful. There's a lot on. I've got a lot of shit to do. With this person here, they're stressed out because they're working in our business, which we're in scale. When I asked, why are you stressed? Like, tell me what you think is causing you the stress. They said the workload. So is it really the workload, or is there other things going on? So we're going to dive deeper than that. And so as I'm walking with this person, I just said, look, let's keep diving deeper. And I said, well, what do you think is stressing you out about the workload? And they said, there's just too much. And I said, okay, so what specifically is it about the workload that's stressing you out? And they said, well, it just keeps coming. And then I went, I know what it is. Normally when most people get stressed, there are external circumstances that are triggering their internal states. Now, when they're talking about stress, there are different types of stress. Now, if you go and read the book, How to Eat, Move and Be Healthy by Paul Chek, he talks about 6 main stresses of the human organism. For instance, there are things like chemical stress. Then you have things like mental stress. Then we have thermal stress. We have these different stresses. But when most people think about stress, they're thinking about mental and emotional stress. So when this staff member was talking about stress, I knew that it wasn't toxic stress. I knew that it wasn't thermal stress. It was probably going to be a mental stress. I know that mental stress is normally a perception. I understand the stress is there, but what we also know is that stress is probably your emotional state. So what's going on with your emotions? Why are your emotions out of balance for you to label that as stress? Like, what's going on? And they said, well, the thing is that the workload is just too much. And then so I just start feeling stressed. Now, if the workload's too high, it's probably because they're struggling to prioritize what's important and what's not important. When we got home from our walk, I sat down and I said, right, I want you to write me a list of everything that you've got on your mind right now in regards to work and your workload. And so when they wrote a list, I asked them what's important. And what was happening was they were going, this is important, but this is also important, and this is also important. And then I said, well, what are you going to do first? What's the number one priority? And then they sat there and they went, shit, I don't know. It's just that, like, I've got to get this done, but I've also got to get this done. And I don't know. And so I could see them straight away becoming overwhelmed. And so that overwhelm was the inability to prioritize effectively. But if we dive a little bit deeper and we again ask better questions. So the question that I asked was, what do you think is important to me as the director of the business? And they said, well, I don't know, it all is. So you can see now that they're getting stressed out because in their own mindset, in their psychology, in their brain, they're thinking, I've got to get all this stuff done in order to make Michael happy and in order for the business to grow and move forward. But at the same time, if I do one thing, I'm not doing something else. And if I'm not doing that thing, then I'm not doing the other thing, which now is making me overwhelmed. That overwhelm is stressing me out. And then when we started going on the walk, they said, I'm just stressed. This is why question asking is so important, and also understanding human behavior, because this is one of my star players in the business. So I've got to make sure that they're working effectively. If not, all that workload comes back up to me. What I knew there was that we've got an inability to manage our emotional states, number one. Then we also have the inability to prioritize effectively. But then we've got to ask another question, and that is, why are they struggling to prioritize effectively? Now, there's 2 things. Number one, they don't know what the priorities really are. Then the second thing is probably a lack of communication or the ability to communicate effectively. Because if this person had come to me and said, look, there's just a heap of shit that I've got going on at the moment. I just need to know from you, what is the number one priority? And then what is the second most important thing? Then I could give them their priorities and they could then work through those priorities. Because of their inability to communicate effectively with me, they don't really know what the priorities are. Because they don't know what the priorities are, they can't prioritize effectively, which then now has made them overwhelmed. That overwhelm then is coming out as emotional instability, which then they've labeled as stress. So you can see there's this big causal chain going on, or this big chain that's happening within this person's mind or within this person's life that they just label as stress. When this person just labels it as stress and I'm stressed, and they keep reinforcing I'm stressed, I'm stressed, I'm stressed, then they're going to react stressed. When they react stressed, they've already got a reason for why they feel the way that they feel. By feeling the way that they feel, then they're responding to that through their habits. And those habits then are consistently being reinforced by their behavior. So they're running around feeling all stressed out, getting overwhelmed. And then when they're overwhelmed, they're not being as effective as what they could. They've got to go for walks. They need downtime and chill time. Whereas for somebody who is more effective, they can work 15, 16 hours a day flat out because they don't need to have that time off to rest, which essentially helps them deal with their overwhelm or their anxiety or whatever. So coming back to this scenario, once I showed this person, right, what we're going to do is first of all, we're going to prioritize. I'm going to now give you the priorities, which will help you. But next time you're overwhelmed, come to me and ask me the question. So now we've got a solution here. I want you to come to me and say, I'm overwhelmed because I don't know my priorities. Here is a list of things that I've written down that I think is important, but I just want to get your feedback on what your number one is. Now, if they had done that in the start, they probably wouldn't have been stressed because they would have known what was important to me as the director of the company. Then from there, we were able to then prioritize. So it's not the external circumstance that made them stressed, it's the way that they navigated that situation. Now, if you want to lead others more effectively, if you want to be a better manager, if you want to be someone that is able to navigate life more effectively, then you really do have to ask some really good questions and dive below the surface level shit that most people operate in. And as you can see there, it wasn't just as easy as going, oh, we stress, maybe you just need some time off. That wasn't the case at all. It was, let's go back through and let's try to figure this out. I knew that when they said I'm stressed, I knew that there was something more underlying. So asking good questions when they said there's just too much stuff going on, I made the assumption that the prioritization that they were working with was ineffective or they weren't prioritizing at all. And that was the case. And then from there, you've got to ask the question, why aren't they prioritizing effectively? If you don't ask why enough, you'll never get the real answers. And I think most people just do surface level shit because they don't ask why. I don't think most people ask good questions, they give statements. Work shit, my boss is an asshole, my relationship's falling apart, this person does this. So they're statements. Statements shut us off from thinking. Questions open us up to thinking. And then we have good questions and shitty questions. If you ask, how can I improve the quality of my life? What do I need to do to make some changes? Is there anything that I could do today that would change the way I feel or the way I think? Now, by asking quality questions, you're going to get quality answers. By having quality answers, you're going to be able to navigate life much more effectively because nothing changes if you don't ask the right questions in order to navigate change. You'll just keep doing what you do. And so unless you're going to take responsibility for your life, then you're never going to be responsible for your life. It's that simple. So by asking good questions, you can navigate your life more effectively. Most people waste their life, and I just don't want you to be one of them.